Hey there, world history students. This is Mr. Everton, and this is a video designed to save you if you weren't paying attention in class while we did 3 different class periods worth of prep work for the essay that you're supposed to be writing. So, your essay is answering this question. Why did the Creoles lead the revolutions in Latin America in the 1800s? The Creoles are Spanish Europeans born in Latin America, right? The children of colonizers. A revolution is overthrowing the government, and in Latin America in the 1800s were some colonies that were controlled by Spain. So the question here, what we're asking is, why did Europeans born in Latin America overthrow the government of the Spanish colonies? That's another way of saying that question. So we had a number of different documents. The first set of documents is answering this question. What does it mean to be Creole? So we talked about the difference between peninsulares, which are up here at the top, and Creoles. Peninsulares are Europeans born in Spain who migrate to the Spanish colonies. And they're a very small part of the population, but they dominate the government and the military and the church. The Creoles were white people born of Spanish blood in Latin America. So their parents were Spanish, but they were born in Latin America. And Creoles have a lot of money and they own a lot of the richest mines and haciendas. A hacienda is a plantation. But in spite of this wealth, they don't control the government. And so, they want to expand their power so they have some political power as well as some economic power. And then the other groups below the Creoles in the social hierarchy are all people of color, because the Spanish colonies in Latin America were a racist society. So the mestizos were biracial. They were part Spanish and part Native American. And the mulattoes, which is an offensive word, but that is the term that they used, were part white and part black. So they're part Spanish and part African enslaved person. Um, and then there were also free blacks who were also about the same class status as mulattoes. And those were people who were brought to Latin America enslaved, but then were able to buy their freedom. And then there were Native Americans or indigenous peoples, and then there were enslaved Africans. And all of these people helped to make up Spanish society. The Creoles were like second from the top of the social hierarchy. Very wealthy, some power, but not the most powerful. When you look at this painting, this is a painting from 1895 showing a family, a mixed race family in the Spanish colonies. You can see a African grandmother, a black grandmother, excuse me, standing on the left, praying with her hands up, looking up towards heaven. And then you can see a mixed race or mulatto mother holding a white baby, and the father, who is a Creole, is sitting next to her. And so what you can see in this painting is that one, society is very diverse. There were lots of people intermarrying, right? Like white people marrying black people, indigenous people marrying white people, marrying black people. Like, there were lots of different ethnic groups that were created by all of these intermarriages. And you can see also that white status, like to be white is to be privileged, right? Like this black grandmother, it's kind of messed up. Like it makes sense for her. I'm not trying to judge her, but she's like grateful to God because her grandchild was born white, which is kind of sad, right? Like, I mean, instead of like wanting to, like, instead of loving blackness, she's hoping that her kid will be white, her grandkid will be white, because she knows that to be white is to have a better life. So this painting shows us the diversity of the Latin American colonies and also the privileged status of white people. Okay. So then when we look at source C, this is an excerpt from an important speech by a Creole leader named Simon Bolivar, who was one of the most influential revolutionary leaders. He was born in what is now Venezuela, and he gave this speech during the wars of independence of Colombia and Venezuela in 1819. Okay, so he said, "We are not Europeans. We are not Indians. We are but a mixed species of Aborigines," which means Native Americans, and Spaniards. Americans by birth and Europeans by law, we find ourselves engaged in a dual conflict. We are disputing with the natives for titles of ownership, and at the same time, we are struggling to maintain ourselves in the country that gave us birth against the opposition of the invaders. Thus, our position is most extraordinary and complicated. Okay, so who's the we? He says they're not Indians, and he says that they're mixed species of Native Americans and Spaniards. He's talking about mestizos when he says that, right? Like a mestizo person is somebody who is born of indigenous people and Spanish people. But he also says just Americans by birth. So he's really talking about anybody who lives in the colonies who's not a peninsulare. He's trying to include other people besides Creoles. He's a Creole, and he's trying to speak for all the people who are born in America and have to live under European laws. And he says, we are disputing with the natives for title of ownership. So they're fighting against indigenous peoples to try to claim the land. And they're also struggling to maintain themselves in the country that gave them birth against the opposition of the invaders. And when he says invaders, he's talking about the Spanish. So in this speech, Simon Bolivar is trying to create sort of like a common South American, Latin American identity. He's trying to bond together all the different people of Latin America who aren't peninsulare under one group and make them all unified against the Spanish. Why is he doing that? Because he needs all the people who live in Latin America to fight against the Spanish if they're going to be successful and kick the Spanish out. So he's a Creole leading the independence movement, trying to get everybody to back the independence movement against the Spanish. All right. Now I'm going to go over the documents for question 2. How would independence from Spain improve Creoles' lives? Okay, so source D is an excerpt from a history book called Latin American Politics and Development, and it goes like this. One of the main sources of independence sentiment was the growing rivalry between Creoles and Peninsulares. Remember, the Creoles are the people we're focused on. They're Europeans born in Latin America. Peninsulares are Spanish people who control the Latin American colonies. The Creoles had growing economic and social influence. So they had money, and also because they were white, they had social power. But the Peninsulares monopolized all administrative positions. That means they controlled the government. And for an example, it says, for example, in 1807, only 12 of 99 judgeships in Latin America were held by Creoles. The rest were held by Peninsulares. That's a really useful fact. That fact right there, when you're looking for facts that show how the Creoles would benefit from overthrowing the Spanish, well, the Spanish control all the judgeships. If the Creoles take out the Spanish, the Peninsulares, then they will get to control the judgeships. So denied the political power to go along with their rising prominence, many Creoles began to think of doing away with the inconvenience of Spanish colonialism and move toward independence. So the Creoles want to get political power. If the Creoles overthrow the Peninsulares, they will get to be in charge of the government. That is what this source is showing us. You come down to source D. That was source D. I guess this is, we used D twice. This is a source about mercantilism. We talked about mercantilism once before, but I'm going to review it with you. Mercantilism is a kind of capitalism that believes that, every time you do trade, one side wins and the other loses. And so you want to set up trades that are going to benefit yourself and hurt the other person. And so Spain and other European countries were setting up mercantilist policies with their colonies, where they were buying natural resources like gold and silver and fur and lumber really cheap. And then they were selling the colonies manufactured goods at really high prices. And so when they do that, they're pulling money out of Latin America and bringing it into Spain. So all of this money and economic value is leaving Latin America, where the Creoles are, and going to Spain, where the Peninsulares control the Spanish colonies. So source E, an open letter to America. This is from a Creole named Juan Pablo Vizcardo, who's born in South America in Peru. And he wrote this letter in Europe, but it was sent to the Americas. And it says Americanos was a term he and others used to refer to Latin Americans. Okay. So here's what he said. Spanish restrictions, so rules, on travel and commerce sealed Latin America off from the rest of the world, limiting our basic personal and property rights. So Spain passed rules that made it so people in Latin America couldn't leave or trade with other countries. We in Latin America are perhaps the first to be forced by our own government to sell our products at artificially low prices and buy what we need at artificially high prices. This is the result of the Spanish commercial monopoly system, combined with taxes and official fees. And because the official monopoly on transatlantic trade would naturally lead us to produce more in Latin America, the government has been careful to place limitations on what we can legally produce. So Spain is controlling Latin America and their trade. They're not letting them trade with anybody except Spain. They're making them sell things at very low prices. They're making them buy what they need at very high prices. They're hitting them with taxes and charging them fees. And they're placing a limit on what they're allowed to make inside Latin America so that they'll have to buy it from Spain. Then it says, Spain could have left us the administration of our own affairs, one would think. Americanos, being those concerned by affairs of Latin America, logically ought to fill the public offices of their own country for the benefit of all concerned. But that has been far from the case. So that second paragraph is just saying, you would think that Spain would let the people, the Creoles, be in charge of Latin America. The Creoles live there. The Creoles know what's going on in Latin America. They have a sense of what would be good for Latin America, but Spain won't let them do that. So, like, Spain isn't even doing what makes sense. They ought to let the Latin Americans run themselves, but they won't do it because they're greedy. Okay? So this source is all about how Spain, like, to summarize this source, it's all about how Spain is hurting Latin America through economic policies. They're not letting them do what they want. Instead, they're passing really harsh rules that make it so Spain gets rich off Latin America instead. Okay, so now we're going to answer this third question by looking at these sources. How much change did the Creoles want? Okay, so this is from a history book written in 2002 called The Colonial Era. In 1808-09, drought, that's when there's not enough rain, produced a great mortality among Mexico's livestock, killed a bunch of farm animals, and decimated the harvest. So, like, made it so there wasn't enough food. Food prices tripled. As in the past, agricultural crisis soon affected the rest of the economy. Mining and manufacturing faltered, and unemployment rose. So, because of this lack of food, a lot of people started to lose their jobs. The mule trains which carried maize or corn to the public granaries traveled under military escort. So they protected the food with soldiers so people wouldn't steal it. Dearth or scarcity also aggravated old conflicts and led to peasant land invasions. So the peasants got so upset they didn't have enough food, they started like breaking rules and like trying to steal stuff. Creole elites, those are the people we're talking about, the white people who were born in Latin America. Creole elites, indignant and threatened, angry, now sought to capitalize on these social tensions. So they want to take advantage of the situation. In 1809, officers of the militia, Creoles, hatched a plot which sought to wrest power, take power away from the Peninsulares, and establish a form of Creole home rule within the framework of the Spanish Empire. So there's problems in Latin America. People are starving. People are upset. And the Creole elites want to take advantage of those problems in order to get rid of the Peninsulares. They're like, hey, all these problems are happening. We should be in charge instead of the Spanish. We'll do a better job. Okay? Next, Gritos de Dolores, which is about Miguel Hidalgo, Father Miguel Hidalgo. So the painting is of an event on September 16th, 1810. Father Hidalgo preached from the pulpit of his church, declaring open revolt against Spain, and he led 600 followers, mostly Indians and mestizos, to fight against the Spanish colonial system. Hidalgo was a Creole, but did not have support from other Creoles. So he's a Creole, but none of the other Creoles like him and don't want to help. So here's what he said. Hidalgo said, "My children, a new dispensation or gift comes to us today. Will you receive it? Will you free yourselves? Will you recover the land stolen 300 years ago from your forefathers by the hated Spaniards? We must act at once. Will you defend your religion and your rights as true patriots? Death to bad government, death to the Peninsulares. So in this speech, Hidalgo is talking to the mestizos and the indigenous peoples. He says, will you recover the land stolen by the hated Spaniards? He's talking about when the Spanish showed up and took all the land from the Native Americans. So he's saying, like, we need to get this land back for you, and we have to do it right now. Death to the Peninsulares. So that's very radical, right? But notice, he's the only Creole who's acting like that. Most of the Creoles did not support him. So he is working, he is trying to help the people below him, but like none of the other Creoles want to. Did not have much support from the Creoles, right? Okay. And then down here, source I, Independence of Latin America. This is another history book. In 1808, Napoleon took over Spain and he overthrew the Spanish monarchy, which means that now the Spanish government is going to not be able to run Latin America anymore. So this history book says, if the Creoles had one eye on their masters, they kept the other on their servants. So they're watching the Spanish, but they're also watching the people below them, like the mestizos. The Creoles were intensely aware of social pressure from below, and they strove to keep the colored people at a distance. White superiority was not challenged. Beyond its defenses swarmed Indians, mestizos, free blacks, mulattoes, and slaves. Traditionally, the elite looked to Spain to defend them, but when the monarchy collapsed in 1808, the Creoles could not allow the political vacuum to remain unfilled, their lives and property unprotected. They had to move quickly to anticipate popular rebellion, convinced that if they did not seize the opportunity, more dangerous forces would do so. Okay, so this document is saying the Creoles don't like the Peninsulares, but they're also worried about the other people in Latin America, that they are using their status as white people to try to be in control, that they're being white supremacists, that they are trying really hard not to let the Indians, mestizos, free blacks, mulattoes, and slaves have any real freedom, and that they want to step in and take over. That because the Spanish are gone now, the Creoles want to take things over for themselves. All right. So that is all the documents. You need to be able to use 2 facts from each document in each paragraph. So you've got to have 3 paragraphs. And if it was me, I think it makes sense to have the topics of your paragraphs match up with the individual questions, right? Like, so what does it mean to be a Creole? Could be paragraph 1. How much change did the Creoles want? Could be paragraph 2. And then what was our third topic? That was actually our third topic, but what was our how would independence from Spain improve Creoles' lives? That could be another topic. And so then just use a fact from 2 documents in each paragraph. I hope this